Hello, everyone. This is Mrs. Six again. We are going to continue that Smithsonian article today. We should be on Wednesday, October 3rd. So, just as a reminder, we were talking about the Smithsonian article. We talked about how uh, they found him. In the gutter. They found Poe in the gutter, and then the article is they called Joseph Walker wrote a letter to Dr. Snodgrass to have him come and be of assistance because he found Poe in the gutter, and then it went on to talk about the just the different scenarios so far that we possibly would have of why Edgar Allan Poe could have died. So, with that, you have the first one we talked about yesterday was that he was possibly beaten by some ruffians. The second one was the cooping scheme, which the cooping scheme, remember, is the voting scheme that they were talking about. And so we stopped here on the third scheme, or which the third thing, which was alcohol. So a lot of the ideas that have come up over the years have centered around the fact that Poe couldn't handle alcohol, says Sempner. It has been documented that after a glass of wine, he was staggering drunk. His sister had the same problem. It seems to be something hereditary. Months before his death, Poe became a vocal member of the temperance movement, eschewing alcohol, which he'd struggled with all his life. Biographer Susan Archer Tolley Weiss recalls in her biography, The Last Days of Edgar Allan Poe, an event toward the end of Poe's time in Richmond that might be relevant to theorists that prefer a death by drinking demise for Poe. Poe had fallen ill in Richmond, and after making a somewhat miraculous recovery, he was told by his attending physician that other such attacks would prove fatal. According to Weiss, Poe replied that if people would not tempt him, he would not fall, suggesting that the illness was brought on by a bout of drinking. Those around Poe during his final days seemed convinced that the author did indeed fall into that temptation, drinking himself to death. As his close friend J.P. Kennedy wrote on October 10, 1949, on Tuesday last, Edgar A. Poe died in town here at the hospital from the effects of debauch. He fell in with some companion here who seduced him to the bottle, which it was said he had renounced some time ago. The consequence was fever, delirium, and madness, and in a few days a termination of his sad career in the hospital. Poor Poe, a bright but unsteady light that has been awfully quenched. So, just real quick, debauched is shortened for debauchelism, which has to do with like being intoxicated or being extremely drunk. So that was his friend writing about him after he died. So through the theory that Poe's drinking led to his death fails to explain his 5-day disappearance or his secondhand clothes on October 3rd, it was nonetheless a popular theory propagated by Snodgrass after Poe's death. Snodgrass, a member of the temperance movement, gave lectures across the country blaming Poe's death on binge drinking. Modern science has thrown a wrench into Snodgrass's talking points. Sample of Poe's hair from after his death showed levels of lead, explained Sepner, which is an indication that Poe remained faithful to his vows of sobriety up until his demise. Interesting. So they're saying that they pulled samples from Poe's hair that showed that he could not have been drunk or drinking, and they're saying it that he stayed faithful to his vow of sobriety. So that's interesting. So if you're picking the drinking one, you're going to have to really prove that one. So another one is carbon monoxide poisoning. In 1999, public health researcher Albert Denay argued that Poe's death was a result of carbon monoxide poisoning from coal gas that was used for indoor lighting during the 19th century. Denay took clippings of Poe's hair and tested them for certain heavy metals that would be able to reveal the presence of coal gas. The test was inconclusive, leading biographers to historians to largely discredit Denay's theory. So, okay. So the next speculation is heavy metal poisoning. While Denay's test did not reveal levels of heavy metal consistent with carbon monoxide poisoning, the test did reveal elevated levels of mercury in Poe's system months before his death. According to Sempner, Poe's mercury levels were most likely elevated as a result of a cholera epidemic he'd been exposed to in July of 1849 while in Philadelphia. Poe's doctor prescribed calomel or mercury chloride. Mercury poisoning, Sempner says, could help explain some of Poe's hallucinations and delirium before his death. However, the level of mercury found in Poe's hair, even at the highest, are still 30 times below the level consistent with mercury poisoning. All right, so that's the number 5. So number 6 is rabies. In 1996, Dr. R. Michael Benitez was participating in a clinical pathological conference where doctors are given patients along with a list of symptoms and instructed to diagnose and compare other doctors as well as the written record. The symptoms of the anonymous patient, EP, a writer from Richmond, were clear. EP had succumbed to rabies. According to EP's supervising physician, Dr. J.J. Moran, EP had been admitted to the hospital due to lethargy and confusion. And lethargy means like you're just really tired. Like it's like you can't get up and move around, you're exhausted. Once admitted, EP's condition began rapid downward spiral. Shortly, the patient was exhibiting delirium, visual hallucinations, wide variations in impulse rate, and rapid shallow breathing. Within 4 days, the median length of survival after the onset of serious rabies symptoms, EP was dead. E.P. Benez soon found out wasn't just any author from Richmond. It was Poe, whose death the Maryland cardiologist had diagnosed as a clear case of rabies, a fairly common virus in the 19th century, running counter to any prevailed theories at the time. Benitez's diagnosis ran in September 1996 issue of the Maryland Medical Journal. As Benitez pointed out in the article, without DNA evidence, it's impossible to say with 100% certainty that Poe succumbed to the rabies virus. There are a few kinks in the theory, including no evidence of hydrophobia, those affected with rabies developing a fear of water. Poe was reported to have been drinking water at the hospital until his death, nor any evidence of an animal bite, though some with rabies don't remember being bitten by a small animal. Still, at the time of the article's publication, Jeff Jerome, curator of the Poe's House Museum in Baltimore, agreed with Benitez's diagnosis. This is the first time since Poe died that the medical person looked at Poe's death without any preconceived notions. Jerome told the Chicago Tribune on October of 1996, if he knew it was Edgar Allan Poe, he'd think, oh yeah, drugs, alcohol, and that would influence his decision. Dr. Benitez had no agenda. So, interesting. Lots of medical evidence here in this one. Some yes, some possibly going against that. So rabies is an interesting theory. Brain tumor. One of the most recent theories about Poe's death suggests that the author succumbed to a brain tumor, which influenced his behavior before his death. When Poe died, he was buried rather unceremoniously in an unmarked grave in a Baltimore graveyard. 26 years later, a statue was erected honoring Poe near the graveyard's entrance. Poe's coffin was dug up and his remains exhumed in order to be moved to the new place of honor. But more than two decades of buried decay had not been kind to Poe's coffin or the corpse within it, and the apparatus fell apart as the workers tried to move it from one part of the graveyard to the other. Little remained of Poe's body, but one worker did remark on the strange feature of Poe's skull, a mass rolling around inside. Newspaper of the day claimed that the clump was Poe's brain, shriveled yet intact after almost 3 decades in the ground. We know today that the mass could not be Poe's brain, which is one of the first parts of the body to rot after death. But Matthew Pearl, an American author, wrote a novel about Poe's death, was nonetheless intrigued by this clump. He contacted a forensic pathologist who told him that while the clump couldn't be a brain, it could be a brain tumor, which can calcify after death into a hard mass. According to Sumner, Pearl isn't the only person to believe Poe suffered from a brain tumor. A New York physician once told Poe that he had a lesion on his brain that caused his adverse reactions to alcohol. So brain tumors, pretty interesting. Lots of facts in there as well. It's going to be hard to choose. All right, so number 8, the flu. A far less sinister theory suggests that Poe merely succumbed to the flu, which might have turned into deadly pneumonia. On his deathbed, as Sumner explained in the days leading up to Poe's departure from Richmond, the author visited a physician complaining of illness. His last night in town, he was very sick, and his soon-to-be wife noted that he had a weak pulse, a fever, and she didn't think he should take the journey to Philadelphia, says Sumner. He visited a doctor, and the doctor also told the traveler that he was too sick. According to newspaper reports from the time, it was raining in Baltimore when Poe was there, which Sumner thinks could explain why Poe was found in clothes not his own. The cold and rain exacerbated the flu he already had, said Sumner, and maybe that eventually led to pneumonia. The high fever might account for his hallucinations and confusion. Interesting. The last is murder. In his 2000 book, Mighty Dreary, The Mysterious Death of Edgar Allan Poe, author John Evangelist Walsh presented yet another theory about Poe's death, that Poe was murdered by brothers of his wealthy fiancée, Elmira Shelton. Using evidence from newspaper letters and memoirs, Walsh argues that Poe actually made it to Philadelphia, where he's ambushed by Shelton's 3 brothers who warned Poe against marrying their sister. Frightened by the experience, Poe disguised himself in new clothes, accounting for, in Walsh's mind, his secondhand clothing, and hid in Philadelphia for nearly a week, before heading back to Richmond to marry Shelton. Shelton's brothers intercepted Poe in Baltimore, Walsh postulates, beat him, and forced him to drink whiskey, which they knew would send Poe into an early, deathly sickness. Walsh's theory has gained little traction among Poe's historians or book reviewers. Edwin J. Barton, in Review for Journal American Literature, called Walsh's story only plausible, not wholly persuasive. Midnight Dreary is interesting and entertaining, he concluded, but its value to literary scholars is limited to oblique. So, murder, possibly. You're going to have to decide. For Sumner, however, none of these theories fully explain Poe's curious end. I've never been completely convinced of any one of the theories, and I believe Poe's cause of death resulted from a combination of factors, he says. His attending physician is our best source of evidence. If he recorded on the mortality schedule that Poe died of preenitis, Poe was most likely suffering from encephalitis or meningitis, either of which might explain his symptoms. So, you need to decide. All right.